Fear of flying is common, even though the odds of a crash are incredibly low. But low doesn't mean impossible, and sometimes disaster strikes before the plane even leaves the airport. These are 5 of the worst aviation disasters in history. On May 25, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 departed from Chicago O'Hare International Airport, bound for Los Angeles. Just 31 seconds after takeoff, tragedy struck. The plane's left engine separated from the wing, ripping through critical hydraulic lines and severing the control systems. The aircraft became completely uncontrollable, despite the efforts of 2 highly experienced pilots in the cockpit. The DC-10 had barely reached 300 feet before it plummeted back to the ground, crashing into an open field near the airport and erupting into a massive fireball. All 258 passengers and 13 crew members on board were killed, along with 2 workers on the ground, bringing the total death toll to 273. To this day, it remains the deadliest aviation disaster in U.S. history. In the aftermath, an investigation revealed that the catastrophe was entirely preventable, and it was caused by human error during maintenance. Mechanics had used forklift trucks to remove and reinstall the plane's engine, a shortcut that put excessive strain on the pylon that connected the engine to the wing. Over time, microscopic cracks formed, eventually causing the engine to detach mid-flight, setting the chain of events in motion. What should have been a routine flight became one of aviation's greatest tragedies, forever changing safety protocols across the industry. American Airlines Flight 191 remains the deadliest aviation disaster in U.S. history. But globally, the most fatal single aircraft crash was Japan Airlines Flight 123. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 departed from Tokyo's Haneda Airport, en route to Osaka. At first, everything seemed routine. The Boeing 747SR climbed smoothly, showing no signs of trouble. But minutes later, the aircraft suddenly lost altitude, plunging 3,000 meters in a matter of moments. The captain sent a distress call while desperately trying to keep the plane aloft, but a catastrophic failure had already sealed its fate. The rear pressure bulkhead had ruptured, causing explosive decompression. With vital controls severely damaged, the aircraft became nearly impossible to maneuver. For 45 minutes, the crew struggled to keep the jet in the air, but it eventually crashed into Mount Takamagahara. The remote, mountainous terrain made rescue efforts nearly impossible. It took 14 hours for teams to reach the crash site, some deploying by helicopter and parachuting into the wreckage. 4 people survived the crash, and evidence suggested that other passengers had initially survived the impact, but later succumbed to their injuries and the brutal conditions before help could arrive. Investigators later determined that the disaster was entirely preventable. Years earlier, faulty repairs had been made to the bulkhead, using a single row of rivets, less than half the required amount. Over time, the weakened structure deteriorated until it finally gave way, dooming the aircraft and all but 4 of the 524 people on board. A failure in maintenance led to one of the worst tragedies in aviation history, one that could have been avoided. Japan Airlines Flight 123 remains the deadliest single aircraft disaster. But the worst aviation accident in history occurred in 1977, the Tenerife airport disaster, which claimed 583 lives and injured 61 more. On March 27th, KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736 collided in a catastrophic chain of events. Both planes had originally been bound for Gran Canaria Airport, but were diverted to Tenerife North Airport due to a bomb threat. The small airport became overcrowded, creating a chaotic environment for pilots and air traffic controllers. To make matters worse, dense fog blanketed the runway, reducing visibility to just 500 feet, far below today's safety standards. Amid the confusion, KLM Flight 4805 began its takeoff roll without full clearance, while Pan Am Flight 1736 was still taxiing down the same runway, searching for its exit. A deadly miscommunication between air traffic control and both flight crews meant that no one realized the 2 aircrafts were on a collision course until it was too late. The KLM jet, already at high speed, struck the Pan Am plane and ignited a massive fireball on impact. All 248 passengers and crew aboard KLM died instantly. On the Pan Am flight, 335 people lost their lives, but 61 managed to escape. the Tenerife disaster remains the deadliest aviation accident in history, a tragedy not caused by mechanical failure, but by a lethal combination of bad visibility, communication breakdowns, and human error. On July 3, 1988, Iran Air Flight 655 was shot down by the U.S. Navy's guided missile cruiser, the USS Vincennes. Tensions in the region were high due to the Iran-Iraq War, and the Vincennes was fighting another boat at the time. The Vincennes, operating in the Persian Gulf, mistakenly identified the commercial airliner as an Iranian F-14 fighter jet. Despite sending multiple radio warnings, the Vincennes crew received no response from the aircraft. It remains unclear whether the pilots never heard the warnings or simply did not realize they were being addressed. Believing they were under threat, the Vincennes launched 2 surface-to-air missiles. The Airbus A300 was struck while flying at 35,000 feet, breaking apart mid-air. All 290 people on board perished, including 66 children. The incident was widely condemned, with many calling the actions of the Vincennes reckless. Investigations revealed that Iran Air 655 had been transmitting a civilian signal and was flying along its designated commercial air route, which contradicted the U.S. Navy's initial claims that the plane was aggressively approaching the warship. Although U.S. officials later described it as a tragic mistake, no formal apology was ever issued. In 1996, the U.S. agreed to pay $61.8 million in compensation to the victims' families, but the incident remains a deeply controversial moment in aviation and military history. On May 25, 2002, China Airlines Flight 611 took off from Taiwan, bound for Hong Kong. The flight seemed routine until the aircraft reached 35,000 feet. Without warning, the Boeing 747 began to disintegrate mid-air, breaking apart piece by piece over the Taiwan Strait. Debris rained down into the waters below, sealing the fate for everyone aboard. In the aftermath, investigators worked to uncover the cause of the disaster, and the answer traced back more than 2 decades. In 1980, the same aircraft suffered a tail strike upon landing, causing significant damage. While a temporary patch was applied at the time, permanent repairs were later performed, but not to Boeing's strict specifications. This oversight weakened the plane's structural integrity, creating an undetected ticking time bomb. Amazingly, the aircraft continued flying for over 2 decades before finally succumbing to failure on Flight 611. Of the 225 people who lost their lives, only 175 were ever recovered. Autopsies revealed severe head trauma, broken bones, fractures, back abrasions, and signs of internal bleeding. Grim evidence of the forces unleashed when the plane got ripped to pieces.